Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you are watching on YouTube, you're going to see a little link down below. You can click on that and you can actually join us in Zoom. If you click on the link that's in Zoom, you'll see it'll take you to Mukana, and that is actually where we answer all the questions. So if you'd like to ask questions, vote on questions, chat about the questions, that Mukana is the place you need to go, and you need to go through Zoom to get there. So we'd love to have you there. You really become a producer. This show is all about your questions. So definitely ask them. First hour is general, whatever you want to ask about media or virtual production. Second hour is usually something we want to spend a little bit more time on, and it ranges all over the place. Today, we're talking about power. We're going to talk about power strips and extension cords and how we extend power. It seems like a simple thing, but a lot of folks, I mean, this is a key part of what a lot of us do is figuring out how we're going to get that out there. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Tomorrow, we have Nick Batt here. Nick Batt is a remixer, producer, sound engineer, and he's from sonicstate.com. We're super excited to have him. And so he's going to be joining us and just talking about what he does and what he's been doing for a long time. So anyway, it's going to be great to have Nick on. On Wednesday, there's been a request to talk about Luma keying in ATEM. We may talk a little bit about chroma keying, but primarily we're going to focus on how the Luma key works and how we use it. A lot of us use it, and it's kind of everyone goes, oh, well, I'll just use chroma key. There's reasons to use Luma key, and we're going to talk about why, and we're going to talk about how to use it. So just stay tuned for that for Wednesday. Thursday, an old friend of mine, Darren Okada, who used to be the president of the American Society of Cinematographers, is going to join us and talk about his art. We're really excited to have him as well. So that'll be a good conversation. And then Friday, we're going to talk about YouTube strategies, streaming to YouTube. How do we do that? How do we get attention? How do we get started? How do we work the angle? So we're going to talk about that. And of course, on Saturday, we have an incredible conversation about education. 9 to 11 is the place to be if you want to talk about like education and pushing that forward. We don't stream it so that we can all talk a little bit more freely, but it's a pretty good place to be. All right, Bill, let's jump into the questions.
Excellent. Good morning, everyone, or afternoon, evening, depending on where you are on the planet. The first question comes from Jamie in Alpharetta, Georgia. And he says, needing to maximize ports on an M1 Mac Mini, he's wanting to connect it to two 4K monitors via DisplayPort or HDMI. What Thunderbolt 3 or 4 docking device does everyone recommend for this? Or is there a KVM solution?
Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, being an owner of, I think, every OWC Thunderbolt dock, the one I recommend for the Mac Mini, as just needing the ports, is this one. I'll tell you the model.
So this is the one Thunderbolt in to the computer and then 3 out, right?
And this is one that has the 3 out. Yeah, because the Mac Mini has the Ethernet ports. The other ones are kind of a bit overkill for that.
Go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, so as Ken was saying, but the thing is the M1 can only do a 4K out of the HDMI and then one monitor out of the Thunderbolt. So it wouldn't matter which Thunderbolt, because it's got 2 Thunderbolts. So you can use just one Thunderbolt to the dock for everything else, and the other Thunderbolt connected to your monitor, up to 6K on the Thunderbolt and up to 4K on the HDMI. But that's it, unless you do some funny splitting with other converters.
Go ahead, Jason.
And to round that out, you can also get, this is the OWC Thunderbolt dock that basically has one Thunderbolt in, and then it'll give you 3 out, 3 full Thunderbolt 3 outs, plus a bunch of other stuff. Mm-hmm. So yes.
Next question.
Moving on, Brian Kaiser's next from Sterling, Colorado. And he says, I'm setting up a training room for a one-off hybrid event. How would you set up the room for one trainer with 5 to 6 local attendees and 2 to 3 remotes? Options at a couple of price points would be welcome.
The main thing is audio. So make sure that they can hear him, so I would give them a headset, something that, some kind of headset. You could use for cost effectiveness, you could use a Pile mic into a Rode Go is probably the least expensive way to do that. But the most important thing is going to be being able to see the audio. And then I would, after that, I would look at an ATEM switcher to be able to cut between whatever they're presenting, as well as maybe a camera showing the audience and maybe a camera showing them. But those are, and then, some lighting. But the main thing is being able to show the slides at full resolution, be able to hear the speaker for the folks that are remote. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, when we used to, I'm with a group that we do roundtables, and basically what they would do is they do an X32, and then they would lav mic everybody, and of course that includes a big learning curve on when to talk, when to not talk, because those mics are going to stay live during the whole time. Trainer would always be on a wireless microphone. PTZ camera would be pointed at the people, and of course with the two remotes, you'd probably set them up similar to what Twit would do. If you can do two monitors at stations, that would be better than anything. But also being able to bring them in on their own screen is probably a good idea as well. So that's a lot of work. If you're trying to do as little work as possible, then probably podium microphones, and then they'd have to get up and stand next to the podium microphone.
Yeah, go ahead, Leo.
So PTZ's other company, PTZ Optics' other company, HuddleCam, have got some really nice devices which will follow the people around the room in terms of the camera size, and you lock out which is the area of the walk, and it will only pick up people in that area of walk. It does it with two cameras, one that's fixed permanently and one that does the movement and following, and could be quite a nice, easy way to do it. Obviously, if you want to go super cheap, you could just go straight to a Facebook portal or the Facebook portal TV bar and put that onto a screen and try and start there. I would start by trying to see how that works before spending a lot of money on something that doesn't.
Go ahead, Alex.
I was wondering if anyone's done anything from a kind of staging point of view to equalize the remote and the local people by having the trainer wear headphones so they cannot actually hear the local people unless they use a shared microphone in order to actually equalize. Because just little comments from somebody who's in the room, and if the trainer can hear them and answer them, it's just that little impulse of how do you actually stop that? Maybe if the actual trainer cannot hear them unless they go through the same formal process as the people remotely, that might actually help.
It'll never be equal. It's like it'll never work. Like it's fine. Like you can get away with it if you have a couple people going in from remote. It's never going to be as good for them. Like it's like you just have to be accountable for that. That it's never going to really work. So what you want to do is make it as good as you can. And so, good audio so they can hear what's going on, being able to do it. There's a lot of people that are wrestling with this. How do we have it all even out? It doesn't work. Like I've done it for 10 years. You can't get them on the same playing field because the reptilian part of our brain will only pay attention to the people in the room. Like like we will just always pay attention to, live, people, things in the room before we look through the screen. And you're fighting a million years of evolution, so the key is it's really more of a, not how do we make it great, but how do we do triage, and make it, because what happens is that people make it really complicated trying to even it out, and then they just make it crappy for everybody. It's like this, it's weird in between that doesn't really work, and it's really expensive and takes a long time to set up. For 2 or 3 people, I would really recommend. The one thing I would recommend is putting all the questions into text. So have them use some kind of shared. We use Mukana here, but you could use Slido. You could use, any kind of chat function, but have all the questions come in over text. That is the thing that's what we do here. And the reason we do that is so that everybody has a say in what's being discussed in the Q&A. I would also get rid of slides. Don't do presentations. Just deliver all the videos and then make it all Q&A. We're finding that people's acceptance of an online event or any event goes way up when they just get the videos ahead of time and then they get to just talk, during the show. It's a much more efficient use of their time. And now not everyone's going to watch the videos. Doesn't matter. Because what happens is if 10 or 15% of the people watch the video, they drive the conversation and almost everybody gets almost the same amount out of it. It's math that doesn't necessarily make sense, but it works all out of the time, almost all the time. Next question.
Brian Kaiser of Sterling, Colorado is up next, and he says, "I'm setting up a training room for
I think you missed that one.
Oh, did I? Did I miss? Okay, I'm sorry. Then Andre Dalla of Berlin. What are the panel's experiences with the LiveU Solos bonding capabilities? I'll have to stream out of a location with limited bandwidth local area network, but good LTE cellular coverage. Is the Solo as good and reliable as advertising? And his destination is Vimeo."
The Solo is not as good as the LiveU. It is a pretty good bonding tool. We've used it a couple times. The main thing you have to do is how many people are in the space. You know, for all LiveUs, one thing to pay attention to, it's not so much, you just want to remember that if there's 1,000 people or 1,500 people in the space that you're streaming from, they may saturate the cell tower. You know, so, you know, just be careful of that and look for an Ethernet connection if you can, or Wi-Fi. You can bond a couple different things. I believe the Solo will bond from Wi-Fi as well. So look for other sources of content as well as so other sources of connectivity, because if you have a lot of people in one place, the cell towers oftentimes can't keep up. So, but if you're not and you have good LTE coverage, they'll do pretty well. If you have medium LTE coverage, you're going to wish you had the bigger LiveU 500, 600, 800 that has a lot more modems. When we use LiveUs, we often use extenders, which gives us a total of 14 modems to do those kinds of things. But I would say the Solo can work if you have really, really strong LTE. Next question.
Eric Price in Leavenworth, Kansas is up next, and he says, is pre-checking your mic before joining Zoom essentially the same? Running a meter on your computer to monitor your mic input into the system. So I guess he's asking about what we do with our sound checks and what the right way to do a sound check is.
Go ahead, Carl.
So it's a good idea to start there, but our meters will actually look at what's being muxed coming from the reflector, Zoom reflector. So it's a bit more of an accurate what everyone will hear rather than what you think you're going to hear. But using the test settings in the settings of Zoom, it's a good way to start. Just make sure you're not going to the red before you come into a meeting, so you're not blowing anyone's ears off when you do your mic check. But then because we've got meters that are listening to the muxed audio, they're a bit more accurate as far as getting one leveled.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, and the big thing is if you have original sound on or off, because if you do this beforehand, you don't have that option to turn original sound on and off. I do have a system set up so I can check my mic and get it to that -24 before I come onto the Zoom. But there's many ways to do it. If you want to find out, just let me know.
Next question.
Comes from Ari Block in Tel Aviv, Israel. And Ari says, and has anyone used Chromecast in a workflow as an input to an ATEM or otherwise? In which use cases, and if so, in which use cases and scenarios?
I have not used the Chromecast. I have used the Apple TV often. So the Apple TV often because I can take if I want to share an iPad or an iPhone or use it I've actually used it as a wireless camera. So I have my iPhone on Filmic Pro. I share it, a clean feed from Filmic Pro to my Apple TV, and then it comes in. Now I do lose a couple frames in that conversion, but it works really well as a poor person's wireless camera. Go ahead, Courtney.
I have used it before in live streaming events. You have to be careful because Chromecast sets the copyright bit on. So you have to have something to strip off HDCP, otherwise the ATEM will not see it. So you have to have some kind of little device, splitter, something that you obtain from some obsequious place to strip off HDCP before it'll.
So it does it automatically. It doesn't matter what the content is, because the Apple TV will basically, the Apple TV will only do it if it's been flagged, as HDCP. Next question.
Rupert McCrae in Dallas, Texas is up next. Why are teleprompters so relatively expensive? Even the smaller economic options seemed highly priced for what they are. Is this supply and demand or a niche market or just quality products?
Go ahead, Jason.
I would say it's because they're extremely specialized equipment. It really is as simple as that. Using them in mass is relatively a new thing. So they haven't really adopted what the normal market has decided is affordable.
Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, and I think one of the most expensive parts is the glass. If you're using a quality teleprompter, it'll have, if it's a front surface mirror, 30% reflectance, 70% transmission, and it has to be optical quality glass because you're at a 45-degree angle, and that's going to create issues. If it's not the correct kind of, and a good type also has anti-reflective coating on the back, a fluoride coating on the back. So that big chunk of glass can be fairly expensive.
Yeah. Bill?
Also remember that they came out of television, and there it was a mission critical piece of equipment. If it failed, I hate to tell you this, but the presenters on TV wouldn't know what to say if it failed. I mean, it is a tool for that. So they spent money to make sure that it was as reliable as humanly possible in those days. It's now migrated out into being a mass product, but that's where it came from.
And we've built them, and they're finicky. Like putting it together and getting it right, and having the glass work just right, and having the glass not break and be stressed, and having there's a whole bunch of variables that it needs to be built at a certain level of precision, or it just doesn't work. So, you know, and you can get ones. The monitor is also a thing. The monitors oftentimes have slightly, they're able to flip horizontal, flip video. Now those are now starting to be more available. Like for instance, Lilliput's have them in the monitors. That's the ones that when we built them from Lilliput's mostly, because they have flip H and flip V built into them, but a lot of monitors don't. And as you get larger, you have to have that, or you have to put another converter that costs you more money to do that. Go ahead, Courtney.
Another thing to consider is if you're going to use them in a bright room or outdoors, they have to be high brightness monitors, 1,000 nits or more, and those can get kind of pricey as well, because you're only reflecting 30% of the brightness of that monitor. So if that monitor is hard to see in sunlight to begin with, imagine it being 70% dimmer.
Next question.
Rupert McCrae is up next from Dallas, Texas. He says Twit uses TV monitors on camera extensively to show remote speakers. Do they do a good job with this? And if so, how?
Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, you know way more detail about what they use, Alex, but they do a good job. They look good.
Nice glasses too. Are those new?
I got these at Whole Foods.
That's great. I like them. I like them. Anyway, yeah. I think that when you're trying to rebuild the feel of a round table, I think it's an interesting way to put us all into an area where you feel like you're there. It's an interesting model. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, and the main thing you just have to worry about is color balancing.
Which never is right.
If your studio is lit with tungsten lights, because most TV monitors come with backlights that are set for about 9,300 Kelvin. So
I've been very careful. You know, as someone who's on it often, I get to see my source, and then I get to see what comes out the other end. And the Twit version is even from my source is a little off, and the monitors are way off. So I used to try to tune because of your Blackmagic camera. You sit there with a switcher, and I'm looking at myself in the monitor on Twit, trying to tune myself, and then I look completely funky on the stream. So I kind of gave up on that. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, in the early days, scan conversion was a real problem, and we used to have to, send a specific signal so you wouldn't get a mismatch between any camera shooting a TV screen and stable picture. That has largely gone away in the LCD era, but getting the colorimetry correct, getting a picture on your TV of a camera shooting a monitor and having it look absolutely realistic is still a pretty fiddly thing. And so I think it's not the easiest thing in the world to accomplish, as you'll find out if you try to do it.
I will admit that I don't really subscribe to it. I mean, we have what we have here, and we just, I prefer this kind of direct. The main thing is that what I really like about the problem with the old fashioned way of doing things is that you have a table and you have people around that table, and then the audience is on the outside. They're talking to each other, and the audience sits on the outside. And I think that's what it builds for that. Now, I think so what I prefer is to think about two people speaking. I want the audience in the middle, intercepting that interaction. And I feel like you get some of that with Twit, but when you cut back out, you put people back on the outside. I think that the vestige of people sitting around a round table will go away, because what we're doing here is more scalable and I think more intimate. Then you're all seeing us talking to each other straight through our camera. So I think that this is going to become more and more popular, and the idea of the round table is going to be less popular. But it is a kind of a wink to the past. Next question.
Rupert McCrae is up next, and Rupert says, when is it necessary to have the accept cookies consent pop-up on one's website? Why not just have a cookie policy linked at the bottom of the page?
Go ahead, Ken.
If you have tracking cookies, then the reason why you have to have the pop-up first is so that people can disable those before going through. If the cookie consent is at the bottom, then they don't have an option to disable them. And if you're serving You need to have that if you're serving Europe because of GDPR. You might notice on our site, we don't have them because we don't have tracking cookies. And I think that is the way to go, because tracking cookies with IP addresses, well, for Macs anyway, soon is no longer going to be a thing. So you need to think into a different way of how you want to track who goes to your audience.
Turns out making good content and generating community is a pretty useful way to do this, as opposed to the transactional experience of just tracking them. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I've never heard of this GDPR, but they're just such a nuisance. You know, you don't know what you're clicking on. Most people just click on them because they're a nuisance to get them out of the way. But
it's important. Like what I would
you know,
recommend is GDPR is basically the European privacy legislation that went through a couple of years ago. And a lot of us complained about it when it first came out. We're like, oh my gosh, this is going to be something we have to deal with. But I would recommend when you go to a new site, I now get into the habit of not saying accept all. I click on it and I go to necessary only, and everything else I just turn off, and then I go. And it's an extra second, but it's really worth it. I mean, basically tracking is pickpocketing. I mean, that's what it is. They're grifting you. So they're taking something from you of value without paying you for it. You know, so they're giving you some content. They're trading you. It's like a you know, on a street, someone would, you know, go, hey, look at me. I'm going to do something. I'm going to entertain you. I'm going to, you know, distract you. And someone's reaching into your pocket and taking stuff out. And that's your information. And so it's, you know, so tracking is pickpocketing. And you want to try to say, hey, I prefer not for you not to pickpocket me. You know, it's just like putting a little zipper there. Go ahead, Bill.
I am not a lawyer. I do not practice anything even remotely close to that, but I wonder if there's a slight difference between the implied consent of a blanket thing and the explicit consent of I'm consenting to this thing right now.
GDPR requires it to be explicit, and it requires it when you arrive on the site. So that's the law. And again, I think I've changed a lot over time. I thought it was just like, oh my gosh, this is going to be a disaster. And I'm really glad that they passed it. And California has similar laws going through. And so, but it's, you know, they're basically thwarting pickpocketing. Go ahead, Courtney.
And if you click on accept cookies and it stores a cookie for that website on your machine, when you come and revisit that website, do you have to re-click on accept cookies, or does it use it from the cookie that it saved?
Because essential cookies, which is what it gives you, generally gives you the option, can remember things that happened with that site. It's just that what you're turning off is the ability for it to track you all over the world, you know, and build a model for who you are, and so that you can be bothered by, you know, every time, you know, we've all had this. You buy something on Amazon, and now you see the ads for it all over, like every website. You'll see six ads of something you already bought. That's because those cookies are being shared. Go ahead, Jason.
Well, and for those who are wondering, the reason that it's necessary and worldwide is because of the way that the Global Digital Protection Regulation was written. What it says is anyone who serves a website to someone who could potentially be an EU citizen is automatically, you know, affected by GDPR. That's why you're seeing it, you know, as of maybe 3 years ago, is so prevalent.
You can't keep the European. Some did when it first came out. A bunch of people just turned off their sites to Europe, like literally if you're a European IP. But then they just needed time, and they figured it out. Go ahead, Leo, real quick, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, the thing that's interesting is it's moving to the browser next. So as Apple are now controlling it on the hardware, most of the browsers are going to control it. So it will actually start disappearing, I think, from the websites and more being in the browser as a function.
I mean, fundamentally, we're looking at the beginning of the end of advertising. Like everything you're going to do in 10 years is going to be some version of some subscription. Someone's going to pay for it explicitly. The brand will pay for it. You'll pay for it, but someone's going to pay. People are paying for it right now, but it's not going to be, you know, the idea of advertising on TV, web, everywhere is going to be greatly degraded over the next decade. And that's what the fight is. I mean, that's part of why people are trying to stop Apple from what it's doing and everything else, is because, you know, we're about to get a lot of privacy, and that's going to cost somebody money, but it's going to be honest money as opposed to pickpocketing. Go ahead, Leo.
Yeah, so if you look back when the internet started in the UK, we had free serve, so you weren't paying for internet connectivity in that way. I now pay around about £75 a month, so I'm paying for it in another way, the same way as I'm paying for TV. The same way as if you had said to anybody, you're going to get a mobile phone subscription, it's going to be $40, $50 a month. 25, 30 years ago, they they would say, no way would I pay that amount of money, but we're all paying it now. And so now we should be paying for it and not be advertised to. It's one or the other.
Right. Next question.
Thank you, Rupert. We're moving on to a second Rupert McQuay question. Dallas, Texas. Is the Logitech Brio color profile inherently a little red? And if so, how can it best be compensated for?
It's inherently, all webcams are inherently a little off. So I've seen it go blue. I've seen it go red. It depends on what you have behind you. So the best way to compensate for it is to use some kind of tool to control it. And control your white balance on your own. So on the Mac, we use webcam settings or manual camera. We were talking about the PC version of that yesterday, but I don't remember what it was. But there is a PC app that you can download that will also control it. Logitech's PC app, I think, does some control over the Brio. I think the Mac app is barely usable. So I would use webcam settings or on the Mac, I would use webcam settings or manual camera. Go ahead, Bill, real quick.
Also, just remember your lighting will affect it because tungsten sources or things that are balanced in that range, 3200 degrees Kelvin, it is yellowish light. Yellow is very close to red on the color spectrum, as opposed to the higher CRI lights, which tend to be a little more blue looking. So if you have daylight behind you and you're lighting yourself with tungsten, you can get that red shift really easily. So watch your lighting.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's next, and he says, in the age of YouTube and similar streaming platforms, should cable TV systems be devoting channels to public, educational, and government content when it can be distributed more efficiently online?
I don't know how many people were really watching that before. like the PBS, they're definitely watching, but like the with the cable channels, it always felt like there was like 10 people watching, and there were the people who knew the people who were in the studio. Maybe it was getting out to a slightly wider range, but the production quality was pretty difficult to watch. Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, I think all of those covenants came out of the original granting of cable systems exclusivity over a certain area. They had to provide public interest programming as part of those covenants that they signed. So that's why it's been mandatory for all these years. Whether they actually fulfill that obligation or not,
I think they do. I mean, I think that the studio, and I know in the studio in San Francisco was very good. I mean, it had all the tools there to do it. It just didn't have any talent to do it. Like it takes experience to do these things. And so when you hand it over to people, and there've been a handful, I think in DC I've seen, and in a couple other places, that they actually do a ton of training and they actually get some relatively good discussion. But I think it's more good politics than it is good content. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
The bigger problem is, where do you end up finding it? Whereas on cable, it's like it's always going to be in a channel, so you have to go through the list, and you'll find it from there. And now they're coming out with apps that have multiple channels. They'll be able to bring in those local channels into that thing, because I think there's still a regional issue with some of these channels. So you can't watch something from Denver in Milwaukee or something like that. Yeah.
Good, Courtney.
And also broadcasters had to have a certain, to be granted a broadcast license in the United States, at least, you had to have a certain amount of public interest broadcasting in order to qualify for your license renewals.
But I think if I was a content creator, I wouldn't be looking at those. I wouldn't be spending my time working on public access. I'd be spending my time building YouTube. The best reason for public access is it gives you access to equipment so that you can learn how to do it. So that's, as a training ground, public access is great. As an actual content creation, not that useful. Next question.
Comes from Daniel Goldstein in Washington, D.C. I'm not getting the info I need from NAB's website for the convention. There are almost no details about what I'll be paying for besides the quote exhibits pass, which is self-explanatory. Is there a schedule with details about each event that costs extra?
Go ahead, Jason.
I'm sure it'll be coming forthwith. The press side of it shows a little bit more, but I think this year's NAB is a little bit kind of tit for tat at this point.
And we'll move through this question pretty quickly, but the there are sections that we all know are coming. PPW, that's the FMC, so that's post-production world. Then there's the sessions. And these are all different prices, and usually we don't see a lot of detail until 6 weeks out. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, and I was going to say because of the delay, they still don't know who's going to show up yet. So the sessions, a lot are built on who's participating, who's hosting them, and a lot of companies are still tossing the dice on whether they're going to attend or not.
But I wouldn't be impatient until you get to like September 1. I mean, that's normal. Like we don't see a lot of announcements for the regular NAB until March 1, when it was in the middle of April. So it's not that uncommon for it to be a little bit later. No, next question. Can't hear you. Can't hear you.
I'm sorry. My apologies. Douglas Carmichael's up next. Rupert mentioned the use of analytics to gain insight into attendee behavior at events. Considering the privacy and legal implications of said analytics, the EU GDPR, California Privacy Rights Act, do we have to be careful about how deep we go?
Go ahead, Jason.
Unfortunately, not yet. Like not even a little bit. Not yet. There's no right to privacy in this country, and we kind of set the bar.
The pushback is going to continue, and we're going to continue to get new tools to make this harder and harder. What you want to look at is anonymized data. You don't need to know who those people are. Like you need to know what they did and how they did it. So atomizing and anonymizing their data, you can see that this many people came and they stayed this long. And there's all this data that you can gather about your audience. What you don't need is about that person. And marketers, of course, want about that person, but that's stealing. That's stealing their information. It is, but what you can do is say, I don't care who you are. I just want to know what you did. And I want to separate that out. And, there's a lot of good technologies that allow you to do that. And that's going to become more and more popular, I predict, over the next little bit of time, as people become more and more sensitive to the fact that they're just being, pickpocketed. Next question.
Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana is up next. And Chris says, I keep getting hitting a bandwidth wall after getting Zoom ISO set up. Is there a resource anyone has for finding co-working spaces while traveling that has good bandwidth?
Co-working spaces is hard. Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
Well, if you're in, this is shameless self-promotion. If you're in Texas, you can go to texascoworking.com. It's a guide that I put out for co-working spaces. I used to have a co-working space here in town, and it goes into detail.
The biggest problem that you'll have with co-working spaces is that there's a lot of people co-working and they're using the same bandwidth that you are. So, I think that one of the things that co-working spaces need to get, I was talking to someone who has a big co-working space in Pittsburgh, and one of the things they were looking at doing is letting you pay to basically have them establish a VLAN for your event. That's what we were talking about. I was looking at putting an event location into their space so that people could, anybody in the co-working space, it's not WeWork, but it's kind of like WeWork. But anybody there would have a studio that they could just go use, and to do their broadcasts. But one of the things we talked about is that space needed to be separated from everything else when it came to bandwidth, so that it had all the bandwidth it needed, as needed. And so setting up a separate VLAN that would give it priority would be one way to do that for co-working spaces. And I think that is the future, but it does not exist right now. Most co-working spaces I've worked in, if there's nobody there, it's incredible, hundreds of megs up and down. And then the place fills up and it's like 3 megs up and down. Next question.
Comes from somebody named Alex in Nevada, California. And Alex wants to know, Black Widow grossed 60 million this weekend via online rental versus 20 million in theaters. Are we seeing a shift in the business model?
Go ahead, Ken.
No, for me, because I've got Disney Plus, and I saw it was an extra £20 to rent the movie. So it was like one ticket going to the cinema. So for me, I thought, okay, yeah, I'm going to invest even more in my home cinema setup.
Go ahead, Jason.
I certainly hope so, but I think it's too soon to tell. The way that they rolled it out, I think they're really just experimenting at this point. It's not really a known thing. I hope so, but not yet.
Nigel?
So yesterday afternoon, I went to the theater to watch Black Widow. And because I'm one of these people that says you have to watch at the theater with the big screen that's around. And once again, the only people talking in the whole theater sat behind us. So I don't know whether people have forgotten how to watch movies in public anymore. But if
Right.
there's someone talking, they have the seat behind us.
Yeah, exactly. The turnout, there's just a lot of people talking. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, and I think we're still in that in-between area between the theaters completely opening up, and there's some areas that still require social distancing, and a lot of people are afraid to get packed into, a theater very close, and that's going to take a little while to subside. So I think in theater, and plus there's 2 or 3 large chains, at least in California, that went under, so there's just not as many screens out there. So. And that coupled with the fact that they're charging $20, for a single ticket and streaming, which in the theater would only be, let's say, $7 to $12. It's going to make the box office quite a bit differential, and you can't really directly compare them right now.
Real fast. We're going to go real fast between everybody here because we got a lot of answers here. Jeffrey and then Alex.
Nigel, some theaters you expect people to talk. My thing is we're putting more thought into what we're going to rent online, what we're going to watch, because there is still an experience of going out to the theater.
Yep, go ahead, Alex.
In the UK, £20 to watch a film is much better value than $30 in the States, because cinema tickets usually cost £12-15 for one person. But the flip side is the actual numbers are that it was $80 million in the US box office, but the total around the world is $160 million versus $60 million from by Disney. So interesting.
Yeah. Paul?
Yeah, I literally have to walk across the street to go to the Bob Bullock to watch Black Widow, but based on what Nigel says, I'm having doubts now about going to see it.
Go ahead, Bill.
I think the premium theater experience, which they started to roll out in places that I've lived, where they combine really nice seats with table service essentially at your side. They train their servers to be very stealthy so they don't interrupt the movie. They stay low carrying things. That kind of thing I think will still continue to grow because people do want a destination night out, but it will not be the same mass phenomena it used to be.
I have to admit, I won't go to anything that serves food in the theater because the people moving around. I'm ADD. I just can't handle it. And so to me, there's only 2 theaters. There's IMAX and Dolby Cinema, and and Dolby Cinema in general, because the IMAX and the Metreon is out of sync. Anyway, so and literally in the Dolby Theater, I only watch. I will sit in D9, 10, 11, 12. That's it. If I can't get those seats, I will not go. But I do agree that there's a theater experience. It'll be interesting to see where this goes. As I think day and date is here to stay. I think that they're not necessarily going to replace it, but I don't think they're ever going to give it up. Next question. Guy Cochran in Seattle, our friend, says, what have been some exciting announcements at NAB over the years? He's looking historically. Go ahead, Courtney.
I remember when our RCA showed the first chip-based cameras. So solid-state cameras moving from tube-based Blumicon tubes to, separate CCDs was quite an event.
Okay, go ahead, Alex.
Final Cut Pro 10.
Yep, absolutely. Go ahead. Excitement in all kinds of different directions. Go ahead, Jason.
Oh man, I've been to so many that they all kind of run together. I've seen quite a bit from Blackmagic. I've seen quite a bit from Sony. I believe the first time
what were the specific ones?
The web presenter, I believe, was the first time I saw was at NAB. I think that would be the one that really stood out.
I would say the one that I thought created the most excitement was Red. Red came out and they were doing pre-orders and there was lines and people were pre-ordering. It was just mass chaos. It was pre-Elon Musk. Everyone puts their money down to get one. I had some friends that got like 30, I think 39 and 40 or 40 and 41. Go ahead, William. Bill, yours.
I never changed my name. Sorry about that. Yeah, I have to say that the year the big Ursa came out was pretty transformational to me because Grant had set that up so that the press conference was immediately before the actual opening of the show. And that generated a ball of energy, I think, out into the marketplace that they've been recreating every year since then and making that a destination for the product launch.
Go ahead, John, and then Courtney.
The Red one was amazing. I was there for that one, Alex. I was at the New Tech party when they announced NDI. It was fun.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, one thing that made a big splash was earlier than all of those things mentioned before was EditDroid, which was the first nonlinear editing system that was offered by Lucas, at the show.
Go ahead, Marty.
I remember one year, several years ago, many at this point, it was live motion capture for animation. And they had actors who were on the floor moving around,
Vicon.
and you could see on the screen their animated characters. It was pretty cool.
Yeah. Yep. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's next. Douglas says, would there be any Thunderbolt docks with dual gigabit Ethernet connections?
Dual Ethernet? I don't think so. Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
That's a great question. I think the easiest way to do it is to get a Thunderbolt dock of your choice and then get a USB 3.1 or better adapter, and that'll give you your dual NIC.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
We're actually moving to 2.5 gig, so I wouldn't be surprised if we get a single 2.5 in a dock soon.
Next question.
Rupert McCrae, Dallas, Texas, up next. Are there any production-related resources worth visiting in Chicago, like rental houses, vendors, studio spaces, or similar?
There's some great improv. I mean, does
No,
that
there's some
count?
good. There's some good spaces. I just can't think of them that quickly. We haven't worked in Chicago for a little while, so but there's definitely some great production spaces. I just can't think of them. I haven't been there for a couple years, and so now they're not on the top of my head. But I'll try to think of them and put them in Discord. Next question. I can't hear you.
Robert Soji in Los Angeles. What are the practical differences between 422 and 422 HQ?
Go ahead, Carl.
So HQ is 220. It's actually divisible by the 4444 format, which is 330. So this is essentially the same bit rate per color channel, but because it's 422, so it's just 220, so you're losing 1/3. And 422 vanilla is 147. So that's the only difference.
It's not the only difference. One really important difference is that HQ is 10-bit and 422 is 8-bit. So, I mean, we use it a lot for HQ because that 10-bit is what is adding that extra bandwidth, or part of what's adding that bandwidth. And if you're doing HDR or anything that's extended, or if you need to do color correction later. So 422 is I would say a delivery format, high quality delivery format, whereas HQ is a better mezzanine format if you're going to do color correction, because you'll have more data to work with. Go ahead, Alex.
When it comes to 422 and 422 LT, I usually use LT because when it comes down to it, it's just a matter of amount of generation loss. But you only have about 3 generation losses maximum when you do digital. So
yeah.
Why waste your bandwidth on 422, and you might as well stay with LT.
I agree. I mostly go from LT to HQ. Like that's I picked one based on what I need, but I don't usually use 422. Next question.
Philip Oler, Cantona, New York, says, if I have 2 YouTube events scheduled on consecutive days at the same stream key, will both events go live when I go live with the first one?
Yeah, go ahead, Jeffrey.
Technically, if you have both pages open, yeah, it'll try to connect to both. But yeah, as long as you don't hit start live stream on the other one, the later one, then you're fine. So.
Yeah, the stream key and the event itself are 2 different things. So if you think about it this way, you're ingesting into an ingest point, and that's the stream key. So your key is your ingest point. It's where it's going to go, or it's identifying that video here. Now you can have multiple events, and that stream key can be available to those events. But as Jeffrey said, until you hit go live on any one of those events, that's just this you want to think of as your stream key as a pool of data that's available to any of the events that you're actually doing. And we'll talk about more of this on Friday, but so you can actually have 2 or 3 live events on the same channel getting the same video at the same time. And why would you do that? You're like, why would you send it out to 2 or 3 places? Here's why you do it. There's 2 main reasons. One is a lot of times what we do is we take the same stream key and we open up that event as a private event or an unlisted event, and we watch it ahead of time. Because now we know that we can sit there and let it run for hours before the actual event, and we just get to see that because nothing's going to be different. This is just it's literally a facade another event is just a facade on top of that event, on top of the same video. So we can just pre-watch it all the time to make sure that we're getting good video, we're getting good sync, all those tests, everything else. So that extra event running at the same time, and then this one goes, and this one, and then at some point we have a countdown clock, and we might hit this one, and they're both going at the same time. Doesn't matter, because they're just basically, you want to think of the event as a facade for the video, that streaming video that's made available by that stream key. The other reason we do it is so that we can do private and public events. And why would you do that? Because you want a private event for your special guests, or an unlisted event. And then what you want to do is make that event available in the second hour to a more general public, or vice versa. You can have it be but it's easier if you do it the private event first, because it won't cut you off once you're in there. So only if you refresh the page. And so you can have a private, you can stream something, and that way for the private viewers, they have a seamless experience. They're not having to go somewhere else for the public event. They just continue to see a show, and the public ones come in the second hour and start to watch, and to them, it's just, that's when they got access. So those are a couple of reasons to use a stream key against multiple ones, but you'll be fine. Next question.
Rupert McCrae, Dallas, Texas. The Virtual Events Institute points out that data collection and insights are one of the key strengths of digital events. Will in-person events have to evolve their attendee behavior analytics? And what methods were used in this area previously?
You didn't have a lot of data about where people were going and how they were going before on in-person events. And again, I think that we've gotten very addicted to data analytics. But in general, the great shows that we go to that we love are because someone did something creative and they weren't trying to manage all this stuff, and people didn't feel like they were being chased around them. You look at a South by Southwest. South by Southwest became what it is, not based on data of where people were walking in the thing, based on great content and a great space, and the analytics have been a crutch for a long time that people use. And we don't gather a lot of analytics. We just try to produce a good event. And I think that's I know people will say that that's crazy, but we're going back to that because you're not going to be able to track us for much longer. Go ahead, Jason, and then Courtney.
Yeah, one of the most kind of recurring fallacies, especially with respect to analytics, is that more is better. More is not better, it's just more. You can show more graphs, but what you really need to know is not necessarily complex.
Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, most live events capture their analytics through registration and then through badge pickup. They know if you arrived, if you picked up your badge, and then the little barcodes that they print on the badges where you can have them, the participants that can scan that badge to send you more information, that gathers analytics as well. But
right, and
brute force.
No, I don't give anybody any information anymore. I give them the wrong phone number, the wrong everything. I just give everybody a black hole now.
You're evil, Alex.
I'm just tired of getting all that stuff, and I don't want to get the calls. I don't want to get emails. I don't want to get any of those things, and but I think that the analytics that are valuable from online events they're very hard to track in in-person events is the ability to know what people did with your content. So the thing that we've been, when we see how many people are viewing, when did they leave, when did they come in, I don't need personal analytics for that. I just need to know generally what we had in that area. And that definitely guides a lot of things that we do. So generalized analytics about flow and show flow and process, super valuable, and something that you really can't get. You can't take into account the fact that people in the room are probably looking at their phone half the time. So everyone thinks that, oh, well, they were all there, but they're not. Next question.
Jonas Nattel, our friend from Reutlingen, Germany, says, what's the best crowdfunding platform?
I think Kickstarter and GoFundMe are the two big leaders. Ken?
Yeah, so it really depends on what is it that you're looking to fund. If it's, it's a launch of a new product, it's one thing. Then Kickstarter would be it. But doing it for yourself, it really depends on what it is that you're looking to crowdfund.
Go ahead, Jeffrey, real quick.
Also depends on your location, because some countries might not have that crowdfund.
Next question.
Comes from Douglas Carmichael. Douglas says, has anyone developed content for smart TV platforms, Samsung, LG, and so forth? From all that I've seen, they're HTML5 based platforms and seem to be harder to design content for without a WYSIWYG, or what you see is what you get, editor. LG uses Visual Studio Code extensions, for example.
Good, Carl.
So essentially all the smart TVs are SKUs of Android because they're running simply on ARM. So I know Samsung have their own SKU of Android, they call it whatever they want, but it still works. You still log into your Google or Alexa account. It works with Apple as well, as far as, because Apple have chosen to put Apple TV on these as well. So they're running apparently an Android version of Apple TV on those TVs. But essentially it's an Android ecosystem that's skewed off by each manufacturer, with the exception of Sony. I think Sony just do vanilla Android.
Go ahead, Jason. Real
Yeah,
quick.
my understanding of it is that everything is basically Android. I mean, even, my HomeKit enabled Sony is actually running a version of Android that is pretty behind. So at the end of the day, if you target for Android, it doesn't really matter what any individual brand requires.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael back for a second question in a row. I've read that you need an FAA Part 107 remote pilot certificate, even for cases like a monetized YouTube channel with no business entity supporting it. Is that correct? And how difficult is Part 107 remote pilot licensing's test? This must be for drone operation.
Go ahead, Jason.
Okay, I can't imagine that you need it for a monetized YouTube channel, but I'm going to pretend that if you do, it is not a relatively hard test. You need to know a little bit. A very good friend of mine owns the Drone U, and they turn out people who are certified all the time. You learn something and then you take a test.
If I'm not monetizing it, I haven't gotten a license because I know that if I lose my license, then I couldn't get it back. What if I just have them like, oh, I didn't know that I can ask for, because if we do something that's paid, we get a licensed. Anytime we get paid for something, we get a licensed drone operator. But for me playing around and putting stuff in a YouTube channel, I don't worry about it too much. And I will say that, especially if you're using DJI, of course, you're being tracked all the time, related to that. So you just want to be super careful about how you fly the drone. But there's other drones that don't have nearly as much software. Next question.
John Foltz in Selinsgrove, Pennsylvania says saxophones. I'm sorry. I downloaded some object OBJ files to convert to USDZ. The problem, Reality Converter doesn't see the .mtl file. Suggestions? Alex 4D maybe?
I think that I've had this problem. So Reality Converter sometimes will not see it. It depends on how it was exported and what that link is. Generally, it will see the MTL file if it is in the same folder as the OBJ file. So it has to be in exactly the same directory. If it's anywhere else or it's been linked externally, because the first place generally OBJ is going to look is in the same directory. Then it's going to look for a link, but that link doesn't get connected again. And so we've definitely had some issues with that and had to export it a couple times to get that out. So there's some apps like Cinema 4D that do it really well. There's other apps like Blender that do not. So Blender kind of hacks it up on the way out. And more robust systems will not do that as much. And then you can also look at Blender, for instance, I believe will export. I've gone through a couple different processes to get those out. But you can export other file formats, but you can't get them into. The problem is getting them into Reality Converter. The good news is that USDZ and USD A and B will most likely be supported everywhere soon because they are so much more robust than OBJ and FBX and everything else. And so we're probably going to see that as a standard relatively soon. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's back with saxophones and other instruments with a bell. Use the bell to develop their sound. Victor uses a mic clipped to the bell of his saxophone, but wouldn't it be better to put the mic further away to let the sound develop naturally? Let's do that.
Carl? We're just going to go Carl in the next because we're going to go moving fast.
So Victor uses a clip-on mic because he does a lot of live performances, even on his YouTube channel and in person. So that's best because when he moves around, he's not going to change the dynamics of what he's playing, so the sound will stay the same. And it also picks up his dynamics because the microphone's not moving. When he wants to change the sound subtly, it'll microphone pick it up. When you use a microphone away, which is when you're in a sound controlled studio. So that's a little bit different. That's a completely different setup than what Victor's doing most of the time.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael back once again, and he says, I know Mukana is a word in the Shona language, but what was the thought process that led to that name as the software being developed?
you know, you look for, one of the things I looked for is something that would define what we're doing. I use a lot of the Shona language because it's near and dear to my heart. So I spent a lot of time in Zimbabwe, and so I like the sound of. So we have a couple different things that are. The Commenda is the sister app to it, which is also just comments in Shona. They didn't get very. I don't think comments existed before that, so they just made it up. But what Mukana means is fit for a fit or convenient time, a time or place favorable for executing a purpose, a suitable combination of conditions. And so I feel like the idea is it's a place for us to do these things together. And so it's a fit place or time, you know, to actually have a purpose. And so that's where that's where it came from. It also means something in, what's interesting is it means something in Finnish as well, which I thought was, and what's interesting is it actually, let's see here, it's a place, along, together, and with. So it actually works in two different languages at the same time. No, next question.
Robert Soji of Los Angeles says, my MacBook Pro does not give me the option of formatting my new Samsung T5 to APFS. Any thoughts?
Go ahead, Carl.
So you'll need to actually go to extended journal first with the GUID partition. Mm-hmm. So you'll need a reformat, so you'll lose everything. You can't just flip like you can with some spinny drives. So you'll have to do that format first. Once you do that format, then you can move over to APFS for USB external drives.
Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, Carl basically nailed it. But yeah, the last part is in Window, you have to go to show all devices and then unmount that body. And then from there, you should be able to format it however you want to.
Next question.
Frederick Eckert of Bad Herrenum, Germany says, Apple Motion 5 question. Motion seems to be a bit picky with importing SVG. Is there another way other than importing .ai files or Adobe Illustrator files?
Go ahead, Alex.
I just convert to bitmap. So yeah, PNG. It doesn't like SVG. So I'd make a PDF sometimes, but most of the time I actually just make bitmaps at very high resolution. So sorry.
Yeah, Jason, real quick.
Alex's way of doing it is actually really good. The problem with SVG is that it doesn't know which ones are shaded and which ones aren't, and that's what makes it really tricky.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael back, and Douglas says, Sound Ideas, the sound effects company, has a collection of door slams, among other car-related sounds, organized by car model. When would you need to be specific, and have you ever had audience complaints about said sounds not matching the visuals?
And go ahead, Bill.
Foley people who do this for movies are obsessive about this kind of thing. If you're seeing a vintage Oldsmobile and you close the door and it's a Ford Mustang door, yes, somebody will know that and probably jump in and call you out on it.
Go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, as Bill said, so this is for Foley art, it's for screen, not for music or anything else like that. It can be used, of course.
If you're going to do a car commercial, you better be sure you get the right Foley. Other than that, I can't imagine that it would be amazingly specific.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael again. He said, would it be theoretically possible to mix the Sunday Sax Jam in an immersive format if you had the backing material in multi-track form?
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
And not in Zoom, not at this time.
You could do binaural in Zoom. We've tested it. So you could do it over Zoom, but you could also do binaural in YouTube. So it could be folded down. That's one of the things a lot of us are kicking around. And even if you have just an artist with a single instrument, adding immersive reverb really changes the way it sounds in the space. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael again. This last one. DJI has a Mini 2 drone that weighs 249 grams and thus does not require FAA registration. Would that be a better first drone than the DJI Air 2S, which is 595 grams and does require registration?
Go ahead, Courtney, and then Jason.
Yeah, I have a DJI Mini, and it does. You don't have to register it. There, you can skirt most of the FAA laws except for flying in controlled airspace. And you don't have to register it. So
you can control. By the way, I'm in controlled airspace, and because there's an airport nearby, you just have to give them their phone number. You actually have to put your phone number into the app. Like you could call me if I'm in the way. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, this is not a distinction without a difference. Really, like the difference between those two, the heavier drone is such a better drone, especially as a first drone, that's the way I would do it. Registration is not a big deal. It costs $5, and it doesn't mean you need to be a commercial pilot. Just be very careful what you do with that footage.
And by the way, I cut a couple quick questions off that had high negatives, and we were at the end of the hour, so that's why we cut a couple stragglers off. So now we're going to change subjects to power. This was a heavily voted. I was kind of surprised there was power in the second hour, and as I was looking through it, I was like, oh, a lot of people seem to be interested in power. So I decided we'd go ahead and talk about it. The first thing we'll do is I think I want to start these hours by jumping into the existing questions, and then once we get through those questions, we'll go back to talking a little bit about how we approach it. So Bill, what do we got in the? We've got a couple questions
is from Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana. And Chris says, for flight cases and portable racks, does anyone have a good DC UPS to eliminate transformer crowding?
A DC UPS. Go ahead, Marty.
So there are two companies, Remote Audio and Professional Sound. Both have not UPSs, but distribution for DC devices. And you can get, you can select voltages, and then you would plug that into a UPS for mains power. And so I put 2 links in Mukana.
And what was it? It's Remote Audio, and what's the second one?
Professional Sound, or PSC.
Oh, yeah. Okay, the funny thing about that is that I buy a lot of stuff from PSC, and I've never actually known what it meant. Like it was always like it was just I just knew that it was PSC. They make incredible little cables. Anyway, next question.
Tony Mobley, our friend from Newman, Georgia, is up next, and Tony says, what power supply should you take on vacation?
A power supply I guess power supply, maybe it's when we're talking about a power strip. If we're talking about power strip, I have the vacation one. Hold on.
That's what I wanted to know, Alex, the power strip that you need to take with you. I apologize for the wording.
This is made by a couple different companies. The one that I have is Quicent, Quicent, but I don't know if they make them anymore. But it's a Chinese company that gets different names and different manufacturers, but it's got 6 outlets. That's not the big deal. It has 5 2.4s on the end. And this is the one that I pack all the time when I go out somewhere. Now, I'm going to give you one other caveat to that. Traveling internationally, that one is 110 only. And if you plug it in, it will catch fire. This one is a slightly different one. This is one that I put in my backpack when I'm traveling. And this is the only one I use when I'm putting in my backpack and traveling. And this is made by Simran, SIMARAN. It's an SM60. The issue here is that this has 3 outlets, and it will handle 110 to 240. And you can notice that it has an international plug system. So I can put almost anything, including, I believe, including South Africa. That's always the one is like, can I do South Africa? It does. It actually has the South African one will fit into this one.
What does the plug side look like, Alex? Show us the plug.
This plug is just a standard Edison, but then I adapt that because you can just get a dumb adapter for it. To put it in. And I have actually used this one specifically in South Africa. So I know that this one works. So it works in Cape Town. I don't know if it works everywhere in South Africa, but it works with the big round ones that go in. Go ahead, Leo. Leo doesn't believe me.
No, I don't believe it because the big ones are slightly different. It will work with the small ones. It's the big ones.
No,
I didn't think those ones did the big ones.
It does. It does the big one right there. See,
I'm gonna go. I've got the big ones downstairs. I'll check, but not
give
now.
It a shot. Yeah. Anyway, in general. This is the one that I kind of carry around when I'm in my backpack. I just put it in the lower part of my backpack to go. Go ahead, Paul.
If you're traveling by car, I highly recommend the Noco XGC4 56 watt power adapter. It'll start your car. It's got USB. It's got a really powerful flashlight. And the reason I know this is when I called Lone Star Towing, when my battery was dead, the guy came and said, here, I'll start it. And I asked him, he said, this is the only one to get. I've tried them all. The NOCO is the way to go.
Go ahead, Marty.
Well, one of my favorites is for, our increasing number of mobile devices. And when you're traveling, you need to charge them up. And so I found this little device that has 6 2-amp USB charging ports on it.
Yep.
From one electrical outlet. It's a nice little box. It's invaluable for when I'm traveling.
And I've got a bunch of them. My requirement is that it does 2.4 minimum. A lot of them now have, I believe that Anchor makes one with either 1 or 2 USB-Cs that'll put, I think, 18 watts into it or whatever. So that's another good one. And then it has 4 of the regular USBs. I also really require a light. So it has to have a light that turns on when I plug it in, just so that I know I'm getting power, especially because I'm especially sensitive to this because in all the English colonies, including the UK, there's a switch on the outlet that I always forget about because in America we don't have that. And so I plug things in thinking that they're plugged in and then they're not. And so I always want lights on things to tell me that I plugged it in, and then it reminds me of, oh yeah, you gotta flip the switch. Go ahead, Jason.
Another thing I carry is a USB voltage meter. They're relatively small, and you can get them in a number of places. But another thing for vacation that you can use with one of the Anchor things, these are very specifically spaced, and it'll give you, any combination of Lightning and cool. USB Mini and USB-C.
Last thing for travel. This is a bigger version of what I just showed, this is made by One Pro, WONPRO. So this is again another international plug system with a switch, but most importantly, it uses a C13 input. So the advantage of this is that almost every hardware store in the world will sell that cable. So instead of trying to figure out what you're going to adapt it to, you literally you have a bunch of these, you get to the country, you go to a hardware store and you just buy the cables that you need and plug them in. Now I'm glad that one of the nice things here is that there's an open space here, and we use that to gaff tape the plug onto the thing to make sure it doesn't get pulled out. That's the only thing that worries us, is it getting pulled out because it's not wired in. But this has solved so many problems. Marty Brennis got us into these and solves so many problems in so many countries because you just start packing these all the time, and then once you've traveled a lot, you have these cables in the office, but you have one thing that one ring to rule them all, or one power outlet. I think it should be like, if I ever redo my things, I'm going to do maybe not the South African one, but the rest of them, I'm going to. I want to put those into the wall because I think every hotel, like when I go to a hotel, like in Singapore, they all have them, and I always feel like they should. That's what hotels should all do, is just put this generic, like, here's a whole bunch of ways to put it in. But I'm sure that the reason they don't do that is they're afraid Americans won't understand and they'll complain. Anyway, next question.
Moving right along to Douglas Carmichael's question, which is the second one we had in. And he said, for my networking lab and studio, the PDU1 plan that I use is an APC AP7900B. Would I be running the risk of excessive audio noise with data center class power display distribution units?
Go ahead, Jason.
I think as a rule, having an uninterruptible power supply and then a voltage conditioner as 2 distinct, discrete units is a good idea. That's personally how I run stuff, but I can't answer the question directly.
So what are other people, now that we've gotten through a couple of the questions, what are other things that people think are important as you get extension cables? And I think we can include UPSs into this discussion. Go ahead, Carl.
So this is something you've actually mentioned in the past, Alex. So actually having a display that shows you the voltage and the amps per unit. And so if you can actually at the back, this is IEC, which is the kettle cord that you've shown before. So this is one cable in and IEC out. So you don't have to worry about any other,
And I have a pet peeve when we start talking about cables. It is technically all the cables every one of them is IEC. So the IEC so it's what I talked about is the C13, which is the figure 8 that we think of as a C7, and the receiver is a C8, or the other way around. Anyway, but there's C something, and there's a lot of different ones, and we get caught up because people get caught up in talking about IECs, and the problem is that there are a whole bunch of IECs, and but the C13 is the most common. When you're in a server room, it might be a C15, I think, is one that we see more often, which is the straight ones. Go ahead.
So this is also this one, the power switch also lights up.
Yeah.
So it has a light on there telling you, hey, this is powered.
It's on. Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
One thing I recommend always having is something like this, which you can buy very cheaply and carry it in your bag, because the one thing that's going to blow up equipment when you get to somebody else's location is improper wiring, and that will tell you if the hot and neutral are reversed, if you've got a good ground, and it'll also have a button on there for testing,
and what is that called?
Directors. What do they call it? A GFCI receptacle tester. And he just has a button for testing, and temporarily shorts to ground one of the neutral or the hot to test if the GFI plug you're plugging into works. But the main thing is if the 3 little lights light up correctly, you know that it's got a good ground. Neutral and hot are not reversed. And the best way to blow up equipment or electrocute somebody is to plug into an outlet that some bozo has hooked up himself because he fancies himself a do-it-yourselfer, and has reversed the neutral and ground to the socket. And this will detect that kind of stuff. So if you plug something in here and then plug something into another socket that's wired opposite, you can electrocute yourself if you come across faulty grounds.
Go ahead, Bill.
So I have this thing that I started doing some years back, and I call it kitifying power, which is to say, and I'll show you an example. This is my wireless mic kit. And so I've got 2 transmitters and 2 receivers, but the most important thing to me is the USB power supply that can power not just 2 wireless rigs, so that's 4 units there, but backups for all 4 of those. So essentially I have to have 8 power supplies so that when I get to a hotel and I want to make sure for the next morning my wireless rig is together, this system all works together to charge up a primary and a backup in one thing. I don't use this for anything else. It keeps in this kit, stays there. If I need to power something else, I'm not going to power it off of that. I'm going to buy another charger so that everything in that unit stays together, and I know all the cables, all the power, and everything is together, and it's not going to get distributed out and have trouble getting back to it, so I'm messed up on location.
Go ahead, Jason.
This is a little device called the MM300 from Klein Tools. This is generally in my Crikey kit because it will allow you to troubleshoot. This is just generally a voltage meter, and it can be used to register and track just about anything.
And, there are 2 different kinds of voltage meters. You'll have pins, but you can also have clamps. And you can actually clamp around a signal to figure out what's going on there as well.
The pins and the clamps are all kind of hidden in here, and it's really, really nice. Yeah.
That's great. Go ahead, Peter.
I was just going to say, I've been in power engineering from when I graduated from university in '79, and I carried around, I still have it, my Radio Shack digital multimeter. It looks astonishing like what he just had, has all the pins and the rings in the back, and they don't go bad. Unless you truly mistreat them, they don't go bad.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Go ahead, Leo.
Things a lot of people have the problem with is the UK socket, particularly if you're coming from abroad. But one of the things they probably don't realize is the European socket, this European plugs do go into the UK socket as long as you have, all important, a set of keys. And what you do with the keys is you pull open the earth, as I've just done there, and it goes straight in.
And it scares me every time. Every time I do that, I go, this is a horrible idea. But
it works. It works because if you actually think about all it's doing is it's removing a tab out to allow the pins to be exposed.
Yeah. So I have to, I do that. But I unplug it every single time I do it. Like it's part of the install. Like I will not do it while it's plugged in. Like, and I know that people do it, and I don't know anybody that's ever been shocked at doing that, but I'm always like, that's a horrible idea. Like plugging keys into the outlet is not something I'm willing to do. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah. One more piece that's in my kit. This is just a hot line tester. So, you know, you put the wand at it, and if there's voltage, you get a light, you get a tone, and that's it.
One thing to know about not grounding things as well. I mean, you generally want to try to ground everything. When you don't ground a signal, it will try to find its way home, and it will find its way home in all kinds of odd ways. So one of the things that I noticed on my laptop when I was in Africa, so you can get these, I don't have one sitting in front of me, but there are these, you know, little adapters that you can buy that are not very expensive that, you know, they adjust to everything, and they have a little plastic ground that pops out, you know, for specifically for the UK. And so there's all these things. Oh, you don't need that. It'll still get you power. And it's got this little adapter, and you'll adapt to anything and everything else. Here's the problem with that is that you'll feel this when you plug your laptop in that way, and on the heel of your hand sitting on your laptop, you'll feel this little like, it feels like a little surface of electricity. That's using you as the ground. like it is flowing electricity through you. And if you spend enough time in Africa doing that, you'll actually end up with a dark mark on your laptop that is brown. And at some point you realize that that's your skin. And you know that it's slowly being exfoliating your skin into your laptop. So just, you know, and it's kind of gross. You know, like when you know what it is, you don't tell anyone. It's like, wow, you use your laptop a lot, but it's because you use it a lot ungrounded. It's literally taking your skin off and flowing a small amount. It kills cattle, you know, in high powered things, but like not kills them instantly. They just stop eating because they can feel it in their hooves. But it does it to you as well. So when you don't have a ground, you have things that are looking for a ground, and they can find them in lots of interesting ways. And you just want to be careful of what that means. Go ahead, Marty.
So talking about grounds, there's a device called from a company that used to be known as EbTech. Now they're Morley. Morley is famous for guitar pedals and stuff like that. And they have these devices that are ground eliminators. One of them sits in the audio chain as basically an isolation transformer, but this one goes in the electrical circuit. It is not a ground lifter, it is a ground filter. So it will filter out extraneous voltages and currents and keep the electrical safety ground.
That's great. Yeah, go ahead, Alex.
Following on from Leo's tip, what I usually do with four-ways is I actually unplug this part of the four-way that's going into the wall, and then I use this earth pin in here. And I use this pin to lock out, to open up the two sockets, so I can then plug in the other cable. Which
that
means
does
that
make
at
me
least
feel a lot better.
Well, you're touching plastic, you know. You're not using your key, at least. So in theory.
Go ahead, Leo.
I think we just need 10 seconds on really that. If Alex can hold up the English plug again that he's got in his hand, or the plug, not the socket. The English plug and socket are designed so that a child's fingers cannot actually penetrate, and that if he turns it to its side, you'll see that the earth will actually contact before the live and the neutral will ever contact. You cannot get electrocuted by putting your fingers in to an English plug. It's a really, really clever system. So you can't ever just like hold half of it, because they will never ever engage until your fingers are out of reach.
I will say, as a production person, I actually like that English plug better than all the other ones, because it's much more robust. Like, it just, when it goes in, it's in, you know, and you don't feel like it's going to pop out or get pulled out or everything else. So I actually vastly prefer it over pretty much everything else from a pure production plug experience. Go ahead, Leo.
But it has one problem. It hurts when you stand on it.
Yes, it does. Go ahead, Jason.
Along the lines of noise, I would be remiss if I didn't bring up IFI, the company that makes the USB noise eliminator. This is a beautiful product. I'm trying to find the webpage, but if you look it up, IFI audio, it basically interrupts the USB flow and doesn't allow the ground loop to escape the computer or to escape whatever you're plugging in via USB. I've used these extensively and they work beautifully.
Yeah, go ahead, Leo.
One of the issues you have a lot in Europe, and I've experienced this a lot, is the European sockets are reversible, which means I have many times plugged things in the wrong way around and couldn't work out why I've got UPSs blowing, because you can literally plug them in upside down. In some of the countries, there are different ways that they put the earth pin in, and it extends on some and doesn't on others. But in a lot of cases, particularly as you saw with this one, anything that's like that, which way is positive?
And then when you're in Italy, Italy's 3 pins, right? Where they put the earth in the center.
Yes, actually, it's Switzerland. Switzerland have a slightly different one with a 3rd pin in a different. Everything has in Europe has this profile, but the pin locations can be slightly different for the earth pin in some of the countries, and it just drives you up the wall. Particularly if you have to go to Switzerland, where you can't, because nobody carries the stuff, so you have to do exactly what you said, which is work on the other end, not this end.
And for us, that's been super useful, to just do it that way. Go ahead, Bill.
So let's talk for just a second about grounded Edisons in the US. One of the things that confuses me always, most of them work perfectly well. There are probably 10 or 15% that are way too loose and they fall out, and you're going, why did they design it so poorly? And then on the other end, there's about 20% that once you insert the plug into it, it is virtually impossible, unless you're a weightlifter, to get it out. I'm just confused as to why there is so much manufacturing slop, for lack of a better term, in the receptacles that we use every day.
I'm gonna guess that somebody decided they wanted to be a loose fit or a tight fit. Like they literally are deciding, like, oh, I want it to. It's because it's a millimeter of difference of travel to change it from one flavor to another. With the ones that are loose, I often just pinch them. Pinch them together, and then they.
Those tight ones drive me nuts. Have you ever tried to pull out a regular Edison plug and it just won't give?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
It's got a locking mechanism in it.
Go ahead, Peter.
I was just going to, what's odd is this conversation compared to the one we had last week about whoever designed that plug on the other end that goes into the Blackmagic 6K camera.
Right.
Didn't understand how to design a robust plug. I don't get it.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm used to using large Russell Stoll connectors where we were taking 443 phase into a large mainframe computer. I mean, talk about something that, first of all, you can't put it in the wrong way. It's impossible to. And of course, the plugs are literally the size of my fingers.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There's three connectors in there, and they're each one of them the size of my fingers. But you'll get power, and it's clean power.
Yeah, exactly. Go ahead, Carl.
So in Australia, we have the smiley face plug. So it solves a few of the problems. We also have a longer earth lead, just like the UK. So earth will go on first before. You can't do it upside down. So we looked at all the world systems, made it small, so it's about the same size as the US system, relatively. But also has it doesn't have the fuse, which you find in the UK system, but it has the simplicity of the US and the European system, and it has the earth in first, same as UK system. So the Australian plug is kind of the only problem with the Australian plug is if you're going to use it industrially, go to 3-phase, which is screw in. Which most countries will have a screw-in version of their power, and that's where so if you're going to do production like a live production here in Australia, you're not going to use the smiley plug. You're going to use a 3-phase to 1-phase box, and then in your 1-phase box you can plug in all your ATEMs and stuff. So that's how you're going to do it.
Good, Marty.
So once you have the connector plugged into the wall, you need to think about what happens to the ground and the signal beyond that. So I've built a fair number of production studios and recording studios, and grounding is extremely important for low noise, right? And so there's in the US, there's an alternative grounding system called hospital ground, which is actually used in hospitals. And they use a specific, different kind of electrical outlet that separates the ground pin from the conduit ground, which is called mechanical ground. So the conduit connects the electrically, because it's metallic, connects the outlet box in the wall, the conduit, and the breaker box, right? All those grounds from all the electrical outlets go into the breaker box to a bus bar, and then that goes out to a spike that's put into the ground. With a hospital ground, the third pin on the electrical outlet is carried by a separate wire, does not go into the breaker box. It goes into a separate bus bar, fairly massive bus bar, and that goes into a different spike in the ground. And so all these specific electrical outlets get grounded together, and so they're all on the same electrical ground. And that really reduces your noise and brings everything to the same ground potential voltage.
And usually they code those by making them orange. So if you see orange sockets on a hospital, that's what those are.
Right, or an orange dot, or an orange completely orange electrical outlet. Yes.
Good, Peter.
That's what I was going to say, is those are the orange outlets, and that's actually done to control the possibility of sparking, because in hospital rooms where there is potential for high oxygen content, higher than normal, you might have a serious problem if a spark occurs.
One thing that once you get it out there and you have them, one of the ones that I like a lot as far as this is made by Belkin. Now you have to be careful because you add a lot of outlets, but we have to remember that most of our electronics are very low draw. And so, but they have little warts that we have to deal with. And so this is a great little, this is made by Belkin, and this has, a solid 12 of them. The big thing that this does is these all rotate. So you can get things out of each other's way, as you're putting those in. And so we use these a lot when we have, just a bunch of small electronics that all need to be covered. Now, this is where you want to use a kilowatt. And, kilowatt is a little thing that'll measure how many watts you're pulling so that you know that you're not going to overload a circuit, because if you start putting a lot of heavy stuff into this, bad things happen. But if you're doing something that you have a bunch of small electronics that usually you can fill this whole thing and you'll be hitting 10 or 12 watt, 10 or 12 amps out of a 15 or 20 amp circuit. And so it works fine. I think I have another, I also get pigtails. I don't know if you guys, I'll let someone else talk for a second. I'll find the pigtails. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, I have a rack mount version of that, which has pigtails included. But as you know, another thing that's in my electrical bag are a series of 6-inch pigtails that I'm sure Alex is going to show. And he probably has the fancy ones. Or no, those are the simple ones. There are fancy ones that go flat that will allow you to move them, 360 degrees around. Those are also very handy. Yeah.
These are monoprice. They're like $1.13 each or something like that. And this is a Edison to C13, which is the standard one. This is to the figure 8, which I think is a C7. And this one is this is kind of cool. This is a receiver that is goes to C13, so you can plug this in. Now, why would you need that? Well, it's because you have some power supply that needs the figure 8, but what you have is a C13 plug, like you have one of these, or you go to the hardware store and you can plug those in. Now you can power you can power your little thing. Now the other thing that's really useful is a lot of TVs, if they don't have a figure 8 in your hotel room, they'll have a C13. So then you can use this to convert you can pull the TV out, because who uses a TV anymore? so you pull the power out of it and put it into here. There's usually something in your hotel room that has one or the other. If you need to power things up. I think someone was showing earlier a power supply with a figure 8 just plugged into it, like for a Mac, the Apple power supply. Yeah, the Apple power supply just has a figure 8 you can just pull the little adapter off and put that in. That means you can go to anything in the hardware store. And with this little adapter that goes C13 to C7, you can really get to, you have many options at that point. But I carry a lot of these. We have a whole bag of these usually, because this means that anything that's sitting, any wall warts that are competing with each other can be moved away. Because you can get these, this is a C13, but you can also get this this is like a tiny extension cord. So this can be Edison to Edison, and it will work as well. Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, one thing I was going to mention too, if you work in any studios in Hollywood or in maybe New York, so on, a lot of them, in order to control who plugged anything in, have twist lock connectors, which are not normally carried by most people. So you'd be well advised to have a little twist lock to standard Edison converter. So if you wanted to plug something in, you didn't have to get a union electrician to give you the little adapter to plug your stuff in.
Although plugging stuff in like in a union facility I usually just wait for somebody to show up. And just like if I'm not allowed to plug something in, I usually, wait until I get my desk access. And that is another reason. But go ahead.
I'm sorry. You'd be surprised how many productions are delayed by having to plug something in that's crucial for a shot, and the local 40 guy hasn't shown up for work yet.
So
the whole production is delayed because you can't plug anything in.
No, absolutely. And but one of the things that I'm careful of, because it's one of those things that I understand. There's A, it's their job, but B, it allows them to know where everything's going. And so but what that also is a reason that you want to pre-wire everything before you get there, so that there's a minimum number of things that you need. You're just asking for a lunchbox being dropped down somewhere. A lunchbox is, it'll convert from whatever they're sending out, usually much higher amperage and voltage, down to Edison's. And oftentimes, because it's 3-phase coming in, you'll have 3 different colors that are, the different circuits that you have, and then you plug into those. But we get everything ready to go. When they bring those in, we just launch into them. But the other thing to think about is having lots of outlets that are available. Like if you're in production, long strips, we mount the long strips to the back of our. Now I will admit, we come to productions with our own 6-foot tables if we're coming in on a truck. So our own wood, high quality 6-foot tables. They look exactly like the ones that are at the venue, but they don't have splinters everywhere. And they, not that I'm bitter. Anyway, and they also, they're in better condition, and we know what we're expecting. Like the one that I have here, I have an old one that we used to use. It's got little Velcro strips that we can actually hook the wiring to and everything else. We put string wire along the inside, just to kind of give lighting for people to walk around. And then we put the long strips in, and then from those long strips, we run these are what we consider, again, I showed these earlier. These are what we consider client facing. So they look pretty. And then usually we populate these with a bunch of different possible outlets there. And it happened to be that when we got these, our client was Salesforce. And so our largest client was Salesforce. So these were white, and then we had all blue cables that came out of them, and they were very happy. Go ahead, Alex.
And that reminds me of a problem at events, of course, is the fact that clients or members of the audience want to plug in their phones and their technology into your power sources around the audience area. So either supply them or have some already, not, deal with that.
I highly recommend if you're backstage, if you're front stage, so we build them, or I know that a lot of our clients would build these charging stations, and it's a great value add for an event, is to have lots and lots and lots of charging stations. It really makes people happy. It reduces stress dramatically. It is probably more important than muffins, is to have charging stations. Be careful that they're dumb charging stations. Make sure that there's no smart circuitry in there. And you also want to secure them so that it's not easy to replace the power supply. And the reason for that is anybody who understands security understands, like, providing a whole bunch of USB connections to everybody's thing. So we basically really put security as an issue, so that people don't feel like that you could just open it. Because you'll end up with, especially if you're doing like a Google event or something, someone will try to pry it open, to just, not because they're trying to do anything bad. They want to know if it can be pried open. And so it being secure is important. But backstage, I would highly, because what you can do, of course, is you can put circuitry in there that once you're connecting, because that's the number one way that you can get into a piece of hardware, is them connecting to it. There's a lot of the hacks that can be done to a phone or to a computer can't be done over anything other than a physical connection. And so that's why like at an airport, I won't plug into one of those, and I'll plug my plug into it. I won't plug into a general one. But you want to be secure about that. If you're backstage, it is a huge value add to your client to have plentiful charging, and it is a small cost. Like, it is one of the easiest ways to have your client be less stressed and less freaked out and everything else, because what happens is in the middle of the show, their phone dies, and now they're out of communication, they're frustrated, and that will spill over to your event. You know, and so so on every single 6-foot table, we will have 1 or 2 chargers with multiple, you know, connections, and those aren't used for our production. They are literally only for production people, and there's way more than we need, and it doesn't matter. Like it's just, you know, just lots and lots and lots of those. Now those are on a different circuit than our production, so that if some reason too many people plug in, it doesn't thump our event. But it's really worth it. I know I'm kind of going off on that, but it's just. I couldn't, it is hard to describe how much the stress level went down with our clients when they were no longer looking around for stuff. And then I carry extra chargers, like little one-off chargers with cables. I keep track of what every client, when I'm on site, what every client's using. Are they using Android or using iPhone or whatever? And I have those in my bag. And when they ask for them, I give them to them. I never ask for them back. Like, you know, like it's like, and those are like little wins, you know, for that, you know, if they do, oh, do you have a charger? I need to go somewhere. And I keep little batteries. The Anchor makes these little batteries. I'll just hand them one fully charged with a cable, and those, and I'll never ask for it back. It's like a little gift. I have a little logo on it, you know, so it's really useful. Go ahead, Leo.
I find if you don't give them that, they go and unplug things which you really wish they hadn't unplugged. So it's actually cheap. It's cheaper and easier. I did an event this weekend, and they're literally trying to. We're in the middle of the thing. Our production point was in the middle of the room, and people are walking up and trying to see if they can unplug something so they can plug their phone in. They only arrived 10 minutes ago, and their phone is they're panicking. Their phone's going to be out of batteries.
To your point, when we're in a public area, especially our camera station, we tape them all down. Like it's just like you can't just pull it out. It is part of the system. And they make some now that lock down, like that will grab onto the cord and then you can lock them. And so that makes it a little easier. We actually had a camera operator in Chicago. Not that I'm bitter, but I have to tell you the story. We couldn't figure out why we were getting low battery on our Ursa. It was because he unplugged it so he could plug his phone in. The camera operator unplugged our camera from the UPS so he could plug his phone in. Anyway, so anyway, like it almost went out during the show. Anyway, Courtney, we didn't hire him again.
That happens all the time. I get people plugging stuff.
Just like
for the paranoid, or for if you're traveling, a good thing to have is something like this, which is a data blocker. If you have to plug in with your charging cable is all you have to a USB port that's public, it will block data and prevent you from hijacking anything off of your phone. You can get those at Amazon for $10 or less.
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, the super category for that kind of attack is called bad USB, and it is truly a real thing. This is not a joke. This is not something extraneous or made up. It's the real deal.
Yeah, it's not a paranoia thing. It really is this gives you access. I mean, if you look at like it's the only way to get into an iPhone is if you have that hardware is not in the airport like randomly in some switch. But I'm just saying that you just have to know that the only way in is physical incursion. Go ahead, Peter.
I was going to say the other reason to use those plugs that Courtney just showed is my vehicle has USB plugs in it that attach to the infotainment system, and unfortunately isn't completely segregated from the vehicle control system. So if anybody gets in my vehicle and wants to plug in to charge their vehicle, the card I hand them has one of those on where it plugs into the car end.
Yeah, I use even though we have USB in the car, I still use the little charger. I mean the cigarette lighter charger for it, and I carry. That's another. We can extend that. That's another thing that I carry around a lot. Is I have one of those in my bag, which is just and you have to pay attention to whether you're in the U.S. or not. U.S. I think is 12 volt, and I believe that many overseas is 24 volt. So you do have to know which one. Otherwise, it starts smoking in the car. I have tested it in Africa, and it will smoke. I didn't test it on purpose. so it was the first time I was in Africa. Anyway, you do want to carry one of those around. Again, be conscious of whether it's a 1 watt or 1 amp or 2.4 amp. The 1 amp is painfully slow on the charge. So getting one that's 2.4, you can usually get ones now that have either 2 or 3 2.4s that are on the that'll pull out of that area. And then the other thing to look at when you're traveling is you can get one for the cigarette lighter that is outlets. So these are these are actual outlets that don't carry a lot of amperage, but enough to charge your phone, enough to charge cameras and batteries and your laptop and, you know, those types of things. Maybe not all at once, but having those is really useful. You know, when you're traveling, is just have one in your bag so that you can plug in, and that just means it's not just what you had an adapter for. And the other thing, by the way, is that the one that we talked about earlier, this little guy here, this one's nice and small, fits in your backpack, you know, somewhere in some little pocket. It is the best way to make friends at an airport, because you go up and find that outlet and you string this out, and now you've extended the outlet. If someone else wants to come and plug their laptop in, you're not in the way anymore. And you can generally walk up to anyone that has it, that's charging on an outlet, and say, hey, can I just put this in between? And they will let you, unless they are bad people. I've had like one out of hundreds, but one person go, no, you can't put that in between. I was like, really? You know, and so, but yeah, so it works really well. Although I will say, I was flying last week, at least for Delta, in Salt Lake City and other ones. Every chair now has an outlet. Like, it's like literally in Salt Lake City, by the way, is an incredible airport. Like I hadn't been in it maybe 15 years, and it's definitely gotten better. But every single chair has an outlet now, which is so I think that's probably the future. Most
of them work most of the time. That's the other nice thing.
Yeah, no. So it went from being like charging stations to the reality of it is that it really reduces, again, a lot of stress. You know, now, do you guys use a lot of batteries? You know, for, you know, mobile batteries? I think we can kind of extend that since we've got a little more time. Do you have any favorite like mobile batteries that you take? Go ahead, Leo.
Yeah, so the Goal Zero one, which I haven't got, I could go get it. The Goal Zero has just been absolutely brilliant. I tried to use it with the solar panels, and you get some charge into it, so you get something in it, but it's not great in that respect. But for carrying that, it's just superb, absolutely superb. I mean, it does have a multi 13 amp socket on it, but I use it on the battery side, and it'll just run everything forever.
Yeah. Go ahead, Bill.
I've always carried at least one of the big anchors, and the modern version of them have USB-C that have plug-in power, so you can actually plug it into a Mac USB-C powered laptop and get extra charge out of that. I usually have one big one. These are a little heavy for every day, so I have a smaller version that does less, but this is 3-point USB, including IQ charge and things like that. And I always like to have it in my checked luggage, and then the smaller one in my pocket, just in case I run low.
I'm always paranoid about putting batteries in my checked luggage, mostly because I'm afraid they're going to get, it just means it almost guarantees it'll be opened, you know, and so I always have to be careful. If I do put a battery, that even though I know it's checkable, if I put a battery in my luggage, I pack it right on the top. Like it just like literally sits right on the top. If you open it up, there's no way to miss it. I put a little, sometimes I've actually put little M&Ms in there. It's a TSA for you. They'll actually take them. Anyway, just in case you're wondering, I don't know if they take them and I don't know if they eat them, but I've definitely left little M&Ms in our.
Good way to drug your TSA agents.
Yeah. But we got into a habit of starting to put like little ones in there, and we put like little stickers on and say for TSA. And when they opened them, I feel like we must have gotten at least a chuckle out of it. But they were never, if a TSA opened it, they were never there when we got them. That's all I got to say. They didn't leave them. Go ahead, Carl.
So this one I'm a little jealous of. So it's 110, so mainly US only, North America only. As you can see, it's got USB, has two main outputs, main voltage outputs. It'll run 400 watts continuous power. It's detachable battery, so the battery on the bottom is detachable, so you can replace your battery. It's designed for photography, for main lights, so studio lights if you want to take them out in the field. I'm a little jealous because Interfit did say they were going to make a 240 volt of this, and they never did, but Godox have come to the party. So Godox are going to make this. But this is for anyone who's in media in North America only, not mad about that, but this is put 2 of these in your bag as far as the inverters and get 4 batteries. So 2 inverters, 4 batteries. You can run an entire show. You don't need power. So 400 watts will run ATEMs for quite a long time.
Go ahead, Peter. Nope, can't hear you. But your sync is amazing.
I carry this Mophie pack around on a regular basis when I was traveling in my backpack to keep my phone charged while I was phone and iPad charged. But I recently, Chris Fritsch turned me on to this one, which was there's a 2000 milliamp power pack that will and cord, which will power the Blackmagic 6K.
Who makes it?
Portable. It's who's it made by? I'm getting these. Sorry, I can't find that page on Amazon anymore.
Right. Yeah. Go ahead, Jason.
Along those lines, powering the 6K is a great thing. I just got the 6K Pro, which is a little bit better because it's using the Sony battery standard, but a D-tap works really well. Along the lines of power, I have an Anchor that is 10,000 milliamp hours, and it has USB-C, USB Mini, and standard Lightning. And they're actually attached to it as one little device, and it works absolutely beautifully. That's my go-to.
Good, Marty.
So a couple of my favorite accessories for like power cords and stuff. I have these splitters that, and I use these in my racks. I use these for portable stuff. And this one, I'll start with this one. This one has two IEC connectors. So
C13.
plugging directly into the back.
Not that I C13.
C13s, right.
They're
so
all
these
IEC.
go directly into your equipment. And then I have another one here that's got one C13 and a standard electrical Edison on it.
I think that's
so,
C15.
C15. So I can go into my equipment, and then this goes into a cord that goes to my next piece of equipment, and you can keep daisy chaining off of one electrical outlet.
That's great. Yeah, they make them with two C13s, and the thing that people always say, why would you do that? To put it into, why would you put the same power into the same, primary and backup? And there's two things. One is usually I don't use it that way. I have a whole bunch of things in a rack, and I use those Ys to go into two different ones, down the thing. But the other thing is that if you have really good backed up power, putting it into both means that you're backing up the power supply. So you're actually, you want to remember they're doubling the draw too. so just remember that's happening there. Go ahead, Bill.
For me, it's been an interesting change because I used to travel, and every shoot that I had big totes full of coiled heavy duty XLR 12, or not XLR, but power cables that were 12 gauge. A tote of those can weigh like 50, 60 pounds, and lugging those around, I'd always have to take some kind of a wheel dolly for that. As cameras got smaller and lighter and less power draw, I find myself moving more and more to battery power, even for the longer shoots. If you can keep batteries recycling so that you always have fresh power that way. I just think I got tired of carrying copper, because those copper core extension cords it seemed like old fashioned. So it's just a change in philosophy for me. And I tried to focus on a small battery. Sony, those Sony larger 750s, or there's some others, the M series.
I admit that if I'm in a live environment, I try to keep everything. I love having both battery and short power. So yeah. Short power is generally how we can consider plugging into the wall somewhere. Usually when you're asking for short power, it means you're looking for a 3-phase 100 amp, 300 amp, some kind of connection from the building and that you're going to use instead of a generator. But you can kind of stretch it out to everything that's connected there. Go ahead, Courtney.
And if you're shooting in some places, like I know we've shot at Disneyland, and they do not allow you to have a generator inside the park when the park is open. You can get things like this from the Duracell makes a gasless generator. It's just basically a big lead acid battery with an inverter in it and 4 electrical outlets. It has about 600 watts of power, and it's kind of pricey. It's about $1,000 or 900 and some dollars. But that's a solution if you're in a situation like an indoor situation where you can't run a generator and there's no power, or a place where they disallow gas-powered generators. So,
I'm sorry, I'm just fascinated. I've never seen one before. Never seen the Duracell one before.
Get them at Costco for $9.
That is amazing. Go ahead, Alex.
Fun fact, if you bring 2 MacBook Pro laptops and only 1 MacBook Pro power supply, you can use this actual USB cable, no, Thunderbolt cable, to power one of the MacBook Pro from the other.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely.
Assuming you're not at maximum current draw, in which case you will destroy at least one of them. I've done that before.
But this I saw a guy from Apple when he was setting up some Macs for an event, NAB event. So maybe they can afford for their MacBook Pros to go bad, or the power supply to go bad. I mean.
Go ahead, Bill.
One benefit too of going off of battery power, if you can, is sometimes that'll take out a ground loop real fast. Also, I learned from the Soundies, anybody who's running a sound cart, that they tend to use auto batteries or motorcycle batteries in complicated systems that allow them to run multiple devices concurrently for hours and hours without problem. So sometimes look to them for some of the solutions they've already figured out.
Go ahead, Tony.
So I'm not sure if this is an appropriate device for office hours use, but I was thinking that it might be a good device for vacation. This is the Braven Bluetooth speaker, and it has two USB power supplies in the back, and it's a Bluetooth speaker as well. And so it's a battery.
Yeah. Makes the battery more available. And one of the things is that, a lot of us go for bigger batteries. One of the other things that I tend to carry in my backpack when I go to a show is I'll have two little ones that are like a little bullet, just these tiny little ones. And those are ones that I'll just throw in my back pocket when I'm walking around. Like when I'm walking from somewhere, I just have one in my back pocket. If my phone goes low, I just know that I have something, like that's going to keep this thing going until I get back to my whatever. And so having one or two of those, usually most of the time except for show days when I actually dress up a little bit, I'll almost always have some version of a cargo pocket. Usually I've kind of gotten into more sleek versions of those black pants with cargos, but usually I'll have a couple batteries in there just to make sure. Go ahead, Marty.
So if you're doing larger events, and like Alex, you have a warehouse full of racks and racks of gear. If you're doing, PA systems or LED wall systems, or you've got a lot of gear, or if you're doing remote production. So we use UPSs for safety and stuff, but information about what's going on with your equipment, how much power it's drawing, whether you're reaching the limit of your power limitations. So information and control is really important and is really key. So there are a couple of different manufacturers that allow you to access and control that information down to the equipment level. So I'm going to mention one, and I would be, this whole discussion would be remiss if we didn't do this. So there's a company called, it used to be Snap AV. They're now transitioning to Snap One. They've been acquiring companies, like they acquired Pack Edge for network switches and routers. And they acquired Akamai, not Akamai, but another company that was doing this. But they have a system, and they're also distributing for a bunch of other companies. But they have a system that it has power strips, IP power strips, surge conditioning. You can connect an interruptible power supply to either of these. And what you can do with these is they have a software system called OVRC, OVRC, that allows you to access data down to the outlet level and to be able to control these at an outlet level. And so I have a strip now. I just got this, so I'm just starting to play with it. This strip has 12 outlets, and it's rack mountable. And I can see how much current is being drawn and what the wattage is. I can turn the outlet off or on, and there's a confirmation there. So I can reboot a piece of equipment, and I can do this whether I'm in the network or I can do this over the internet, so it can be anywhere. So that's great for remote productions. And you can look at analytics. So you can schedule them to turn on or off by a calendar. You have lots of different configuration settings that you can set for these things. You can look at the activities. And so here's like a screenshot of all the analytics. You can control this on a desktop or a mobile device. Now, these extend to their networking gear, so routers and switches. You can look at you can look deep into the switches using this oversea network, and it will extend to third-party equipment as well. So it's like a remote controlled, remote access data access system where you can get into the UIs of the equipment using this one interface. This is pretty cool.
Yeah, that's great. For those of us doing live, the idea that someone could accidentally or on purpose turn off my power remotely would be the thing that I would be most worried about. But I think in a secure network or in things that are still in front of a UPS, so at least something goes off, I think that would be great.
Well, this is fully password protected. You need to have an account to get into this.
Yeah. Sometimes it's not on purpose. You like multi-tenancy of multiple people having something and thinking, oh, I'm going to like at scale. That would be the only concern I have. I do agree with you though that having all that data and being able to turn things on and off. I think for my home, I was looking at that going, no, that'd be great for me to be able to turn a bunch of things on and off that way. It's really cool. Go ahead, Bill.
I just one last thing, since we're talking about things that are useful. I bought this about 5 years ago. It's a little travel luggage scale. It has a power supply in it for recharging your phone. But I have found this thing, because it does kilograms and pounds, to be the single most useful travel device I've had for those 5 years. It's accurate enough so that it matches, in my experience, the TSI scales. And if you're right on the edge of a 50-pound bag and they're going to hit you for it, you can at least pull some stuff out and know that you're under the limit. It has a little flashlight in it. It has a thermometer. I don't think I've ever used that. I don't know why I'd use it, but man, I pull this out. I feel naked if this isn't in my carry-on luggage, and I have one device that I can know will do this job.
Good, Jason.
Along those lines, it doesn't always work, but I always, regardless of the airline that I'm flying on, I keep a laminated copy of the press bag weight policy for that airline in the bag, and the most recent press credential that I can find, and it has gotten me out of some hot water. It's not a guarantee, but it's a good idea.
I will say that when traveling with batteries, to pull it back to batteries, there's a couple things that we do. One is that we'll fly with UPSs, and I know that you don't think that you can check them, but you can. You can check the UPSs. You have to flip the battery. So you can, in a large UPS, I won't travel with ones we can't flip the battery on. So they have to be like a 1500 VA or above will have a battery pack that you can flip. And by the way, when you buy it, you can't figure out why it doesn't work. It arrives flipped. So anyway, I think they do it just so you know that you can flip it. Anyway, so you flip the battery, but then you also make sure you put a thing in that says, this is this kind of battery, and it is approved by this blah, 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 that's in it. So that it's clear that we thought about it. Like it's not just a random battery. They'll still take it open. They'll still open everything that you put in a battery. Like putting a battery is in a luggage is guaranteeing that they're going to open it. So just when you put any battery, no matter any size, and you check it, you should always, and for good reason, keeps us in the air, which is good. Go ahead, Alex.
In the UK, when working on big events, obviously you use 3-phase, and sometimes people who work on events who look after this call say there's red phase, green phase, and blue phase, and that means it's special code when you say we're going to go and have them check, to check the blue phase, which means we're all going to go to the pub for half an hour during the middle of the day.
That's good. Good note. Good note. All right. Well, that was a fun conversation. I wasn't sure. Like it was just that it had a lot to go back to everyone. It got a bunch of votes, and I was like, well, people seem interested. Monday's kind of an experimental, more of an experimental day that we use. So I felt like, yeah, that was a good one. Anyway, Nick Batt is on tomorrow. I'm pretty excited about that. I had a great conversation with him. I think it's going to be a really good second hour. So make sure that you come for that. And thank you to the producers. I had to cut you off. so I had to, there was too many. One thing that we're probably going to do, I'm just letting people know, is that I think that we're going to probably figure out some mechanism to limit the number of questions per person, just to make sure that we don't crowd. When I turned it off today, I realized we're kind of cutting a bunch of people out because some people are just really, really productive. So the request for me right now, as I figure this out, is to try to limit, unless we ask for new questions, is to limit to 3 questions per person. So if we do that voluntarily, then it won't be a problem. But try not to ask too many questions, just so that we don't, like, now we're getting to a point where some of our producers are so effective that they are crowding out potentially other producers from asking questions. And so just save those questions. The one thing I will say is the questions that are coming in from some of our producers that are putting tons of questions are great questions. So there's nothing, they're not off angle. They're great questions. It's just a lot of them. So what we want to do is probably limit it to that, and then have those in the ready, so that when we say, hey, we're running out of time, then put those questions back in again. But I'm kind of amazed at how certain people can generate enormous amounts of questions that are actually relevant. So anyway, so thank you for those questions. Great job by the producers. You were a little under effective in the second hour. I know it was just power, but there wasn't a lot of questions there. We had to riff a lot. So I'm just putting a little correction in there for the producers. Anyway, but the panelists, of course, held their own, so that we had great velocity. I mean, when we have, one thing to notice as a producer when you're watching is when we have a ton of questions that we come into it, we definitely move at a different pace, through the, when they're really at the top of the hour and we know we've got 20, 25 questions, we just move at a different speed, which I think is really enjoyable to listen to. So we stretch it out a little bit, or a little bit more lackadaisical when there's not that many questions. So I definitely recommend asking them early, before the 7 o'clock hour, if you can. But great job by the panelists by managing so many questions coming through, and then just holding your own for the last 45 minutes. We just kind of riffed, which was good too. All right. I'll see all of you in a day, or in about 30 seconds.